Good. So today we'll be looking at the water cycle through the permaculture lens. And as permaculture designers, we are always first observing before we interact, because we want to be experts in as much as we need to be before we make some terrible mistakes. I'm not sure if you have heard of the butterfly effect, but by very small and slow solutions, we can actually have a huge effect somewhere else in the system. So this is maybe scary and could lead maybe to paralysis by analysis, which is one of these famous sayings. Don't analyze too much because you will never do anything. So sometimes you also have to actually act without being a full expert and just trust in our intuition and be part again of the water cycle, because we are water as well. So let's observe today what we need to know about the water cycle to have the greatest effect and impact in our permaculture design for the regeneration of the water cycles. So when I start these presentations, I always would like to honor communities around the world that are having to fight for their right to access to drinking water, but in particular to all the indigenous communities around the world that are actually still actively preserving, protecting, and honoring water as the basis of all life. And in this particular pictures, you can see the North Dakota pipeline, the Standing Rock community, where many people from many communities, indigenous and otherwise, from all over the world gathered together and raised their fist to say, we will stand in favor of water, and we will not let you pass here. So Mni Wichoni, water is life, and I believe that in Denmark there is also some people who is actually gathering around the sacredness of water and wanting to preserve the purest water in the country. So I honor all of you who want to be standing together in favor of life, in favor of water. So where is all the water? Well, first we need to separate the salt water from the fresh water, because the salt water is not something that we can immediately drink, nor can we actually feed it to our livestock or to plants that we will consume, or even spread it around in our beautiful landscapes, because salt water belongs in the sea and it has a different ecosystem. So the fresh water of all the water in the world is only 2.5 to 2.7% maybe. And if we then look at that small little drop of fresh water and where is that actually distributed, then we can see that we only have access to this very, very thin line, because most of the fresh water is actually in its frozen state in the ice caps. And of course, this is quickly changing as climate is erratically taking a path into the unknown. Some of the ice caps are actually melting into the seas and mixing with the saltwater ecosystem. And from the whole of the 2.5% of fresh water, the 30% or almost 30% is locked up underneath the crust of the earth. So we have waters in deep aquifers that we cannot get to, or that are very expensive to get to, and that actually contaminate when we want to get to them, because we need fossil fuels to perforate the crust of the earth. And 70%, the largest part, is actually locked up in the ice caps. So this one small tiny percent of an already very small number of cubic meters of fresh water available to us on the planet is very hard to get at, and we should not even be trying to. So this just to show, and here we see it in a different image. This is all the salt water. The smaller one is all the fresh water. And this tiny little blue dot here with the pinpoint, that is the water that we have easy access to and that we can use to cover our needs and that of the ecosystem. So to say that water is a limited resource, yet renewable, because it keeps coming to us through the water cycle. From salt water, water evaporates, condenses, precipitates, and then comes back to us as fresh water. So this is also a confusing concept where we have a limited resource, yet renewable. So both ends of the spectrum are true for water, very particular already. And this is the natural water cycle that we have just reviewed, although, of course, there may be some arrows missing, but we'll look at that in a few moments. So water consumption goes up, and of course it goes up, because population goes up. So if we want to be able to cover our daily needs, then we either need to be able to lower our water usage, or we need to find a way to invent more water, which is not possible, as we have already mentioned. So water stress is a global thing. It will get worse if we don't learn how to use less water and how to keep more water on the continents for longer. Why? Because this was originally what was happening in the water cycle. When it rained, water would infiltrate almost 100%. Only 5% maybe would run off. Nowadays, we have the opposite scenario. 95% runs off quickly over our cement, over asphalted streets, over hard pan roads, compacted soils, and maybe only a 5% will make it back into the aquifers and into the soil and actually infiltrate. So we are dealing with the watershed death spiral, as the people at Water Stories call it. And I use this slide to invite you actually to visit the community. Just use Water Stories, go to their website, and you will be invited to join their free community where you can share water stories, water intuition, water questions. You will find a lot of resources, and you will find also videos that explain, for example, this drawing. This drawing is showing us what is all going wrong with today's context. We have often very urbanized coastlines that create a heat island effect, which means heat is rising above the constructions, above the cement, above the asphalt. And the clouds that form above the sea with the evaporation that we have seen in the water cycle, small clouds are actually not enough to be able to pass through this big column of hot air. They need to become really big to be able to rise up over this warm air above the coastal urbanizations. And when they are so big already, that means that they have gathered a lot of energy and also a lot of water. So two things happen. There might be electrical storms, and there might be lightning, and there might also be very heavy rainfall. And of course, heavy rainfall on impermeable landscapes, on dry landscapes, they cause floods again, and the water runs off quickly. The lightning may cause fires because of their dryness, because of the forests not being resilient. And when a lightning strikes, immediately everything goes up in smoke. So we have 4 images here that actually explain the heat island effect. Heat rises above urbanized areas along coastlines, The clouds need to get bigger and bigger and bigger to be able to move over them. We have a lot of dehydrated land. We have plowed, we have asphalted, we have put in monocultures, etc. And on top of this, we have governments who follow the politics of evacuation. Water needs to quickly move to the sea. If we had a meandering river somewhere, nowadays it may well be a big canal so that the city can grow on either side and the water can quickly go to sea. But this is not the natural way of the river. And of course, we have floods and we have fires, and this is the problem. So a lot of water is actually in the atmosphere in big clouds and big energy clouds and storms that hold this water column of precipitable water. So rather than raining down whenever it gets a chance, it is storing more and more water in the atmosphere. The land is dry and hot, the sea is warmer, the coastal urbanizations cause the heat island effect, so a lot of water evaporates and is in the atmosphere. If you look at this picture and if you understand these dates, 2004, September, October, the red is the 2004 line. Maybe some of you know that at the end of October in Valencia in Spain, there was a huge rain event. It was previewed the day before. It was definitely confirmed the morning of the event. And by nightfall, over 200 people had died because the politicians decided that it was not urgent enough to evacuate. But this is what can happen when too much water is stored up in the atmosphere, and when the thermal laws start changing at the end of the summer, this water can come down quickly, too fast, and there it hits dry land at the end of a long summer, and it just comes crashing down. So this is the spiral we are in. Floods, fires, droughts. The aquifers, they are also in a terrible state. Red, of course, indicates not good. And not only quantity, but also quality. If we think about water being under our feet and under our cultivation, we pump in a lot of fertilizer and chemicals and wastewater from all our urbanized areas. And all this goes into the soil, and we think that this is normal and that nature can deal with it. Aquifers are over extracted. Aquifers are often very contaminated, and aquifers are often contaminated also with saline water ingress. If the water is on the coastline of the sea, the water aquifer, and we are pumping water up from deep, deep aquifers, the pressure in the aquifer drops, and the pressure of the sea on the outside of the aquifer, on the outside of a cave, let's think about it as a cave, the pressure of the water of the sea by osmosis will find its way into the empty aquifer. Also, there are examples of whole urbanizations and cities actually sinking and dropping a meter. And there are craters in Turkey and in Croatia where aquifers have been pumped empty, and the cave that was previously full with water and the water pressure was holding the walls of the caves open, they have now collapsed. So we are actually making our own cities sink. So the state of the aquifers isn't too good either. So we have floods in Poland, floods in Italy, floods in Valencia, and it's not just the water that is so damaging. It is the whole of our fertile soil. This is our food. This is our food sovereignty. If we think that 95% of our food comes from the topsoil, actually 95% of our food comes from the fertile soil that is on the top of our fields and forests. When it rains this hard, and of course also when the land use is not optimum, when we are plowing or when we are abandoning our agricultural fields and installations and infrastructures of centuries, then this is what happens. This is the west coast, northwest coast of Mallorca after strong rains. It's a steep landscape, yes, but there were many terraces built in Moorish times. Yet because of climate change and abandoning of the agricultural practices that keep the topsoil there where it should stay, this is what happens. Our food sovereignty in the sea. And let's not just think about our human health, but also think about the health of all the beings in this marine system. They don't like soil in their system. They like their balance to stay as it was. This is ocean acidification. So we then have more and more fires on the continent because the landscapes are dried out. The big dots, red and orange and purple, they are thousands and thousands of hectares. Yes, even in Denmark, you also have fires. This is the summer of 2023. So more and more areas are just being devastated because of the whole water cycle being off balance. And surely it is because our human presence has taken a hit, has proposed a hit. Sorry, the water cycle has taken a hit because of our human presence. So, is this the end? No, says Rob Hopkins. If you have never heard him speak, I highly recommend visiting one of his talks when he comes through your neighborhood or when you are close to him, because he is the ultimate hope giver. He says, yep, it's bad. Yep, it's us, and we are certain the science is 100% on the same page here. Yep, it's bad. The good news is we can fix this. Yes, the revived water cycle looks like this, has a lot of permaculture principles in action on the little drawing that we see here, and we can actually learn about water, become water's friend, and realize that we need to, because water is present in all of the permaculture zones and has a pattern language. Water flows through big rivers and big watersheds into our veins and out through our body back into the water cycle. We are part of the water cycle. So becoming intimate friends with water is very important. We need to know all of the properties of water, and learning always becomes more fun when we can have little educational games or videos. And one of the videos that I recommend online are the series of the Amoebi sisters. They explain very well what the properties of water are. And in this image, you can see the hydrogen bridge, which explains why water can actually also move up and not just down with gravity. So if you want to know more, I highly recommend going to have a look at the videos of the Amoebi sisters. But yes, water can move up in plants through capillary action, and water does all sorts of things, has 4 phases, has different states, has no smell, is thermoregulating, etc., etc. All these properties, they will help us understand the element better and use it to its best use to cover all of the functions that it can cover in our permaculture designs. But not only do we need to know that water is life, water is at the base of our food sovereignty, and water has a lot of properties that can actually cover many functions in our permaculture designs. We should also realize that water is power. There is a saying in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, that goes, el agua quema, water burns. And this means you may burn your fingers when you work with water, because who controls the water controls everything. So there is wars being waged over water. And in the future, this will much more so be the case. Not just petrol, as what we are seeing now, but water will be the currency of the future. And water is already being used for profit as well. It's already on the stock markets, etc. So getting to know all there is to know about water is just so, it is a real voyage. I am still learning about water. Right now, I am in a training on how to restore ancient and traditional watering infrastructure. And this goes back to the Moorish installations, and then there is the chinampas in Mexico and the muramuras in the Andes, and there is the acequias in Andalusia. There is so much to learn about water. So, but what the basic information is that I would like you to leave today's session with is that the green water cycle is of highest importance. There is not just one water cycle, there is more than one water cycle. There is many natural water cycles, and we would call them the big water cycle and the small water cycle, or the blue water cycle and the green water cycle. And some people have actually called the small water cycle the biotic pump. And here in the photo, you see Anastasia Makarieva and Viktor Gorshov, who in 2006 actually scientifically confirmed that, yes, indeed, the biotic pump, the vegetation in the landscape, is actually what attracts the clouds into the continent. So it's not just the clouds that move on their own, it is actually the vegetation that calls the clouds into the continent. This means that if there is no vegetation inland, the clouds will just come onto the land and say, oh, this is nice here. I'll just drop it all right where I am. I have no further interest in going further inland. But Douglas Scheel explains really well in this, when you get the presentation sent to you by Ruth Marie, you will be able to click on this as a link and go to the YouTube video where Douglas Scheel explains that in the rainforest, for example, these water pumps, these water rivers, they go up to 2,500 kilometers into the continent. And if these forests, if this Amazon system is not there, the distances will grow shorter and shorter and shorter. So vegetation is needed to actually move the water inland. And Cindy Morris is another woman who has shared a lot of her insights. This is very, very detailed, and maybe I shouldn't go into it too much, but specifically trees send up aerosols, small bacteria, small dust particles, etc. Actually, microbiology, where the humidity in the clouds can sit on. You know that water needs something to condensate on or around. It's like when you are in a cold climate, you are inside, it's nice and warm. On the window pane, it will condense. There will be like, oh, you may have to wipe the window to actually be able to see outside. Well, this is what water needs. It needs a surface. It needs something to sit on and to hold on to. And Cindy Morris explains really well why trees are the best for this. The microbiology that trees send up into the atmosphere are ideal for water drops to sit on and to then come back to the soil, come back to the landscape as rainfall. So the green water cycle, lots to learn, lots to go deeper into. But what I want to say with this particular slide is that I'm very happy that finally there is also more interest in this now since the appearance of this report, The Economics of Water. And it's a shame to say that economy gets things going again, but at least with this report, which was also spearheaded by Rockström, Johan Rockström, and it can be downloaded online. You can read it. It was released in October of 2024. And here at least it is made very clear. Listen, people. Listen, world. The water cycle exists of two parts. The blue water cycle and the green water cycle. We need both to have our economy survive. And it may be a sorry thing to have to go this way, but at least when you are talking about people's pocket, you get their attention. Aha, we need to look after the green water cycle if we want to have a business tomorrow, if we want to stay alive, because economy, of course, comes from managing our household. So if we want to be able to manage our household tomorrow, we will need to look after the green water cycle today. And the green water, the blue water, and the grey water are now terminologies and concepts that you may already be familiar with, but we want to make sure that we up the green water again. We want to have more water in the soil, in the plants, in vegetation, in the system. We want to keep the blue water as it is. We want to keep it present. We want everybody to be able to cover their daily needs. And of course, we may have to think about population. Bill Mollison was never very popular with his third ethic saying we should limit population to the carrying capacity of our system. But it may well be that we are indeed part of nature, and as nature does everywhere else, it regulates its carrying capacity and its population of beings, of plants, of whatever type of animal. So the blue water, we don't want to create more blue water, as is happening in some areas where there is a big city. Oh, we need to cut down trees so that they don't use the green water and so that it can stay in the river and go to the city on the coast, and we will have more blue water. Ooh, no. Let's keep the blue water leveled out. More green water, less grey water, less pollution, less contamination. This is our goal. And to do so, we want to learn about watersheds, about where to keep water in the landscape, about how to restore the green cycle. And here I just want to quickly say we'll go deeper into this in the next session when we talk about water in the landscape. But I think it's already interesting to look at the pattern language here. There is the large watershed division in Europe. The north is watering the Atlantic and the North Sea. The south and east is watering the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And of course, within these big divisions, there are mini, micro, medium watersheds, etc. And this is a pattern language that we want to become very familiar with. So it will always be from ridges, water moves through streams into the main effluent or into the main torrent of water before it will distribute into an estuary or a delta and go back into the sea, where it is used again up into the big water cycle. It may take many, many years for this whole cycle to complete. It could be 100 years. It could be that the water drop is so happy in its saline environment that it will stay there for 1,000 years. We can't say. We can't control the water and its speed, but it is many years. Once the fresh water is in the sea, it will need to go through the whole system again. So what we will need to learn about watersheds, and we will look at this and how we will use this in our design. For landscape design, we will go into more detail in 2 weeks' time. But just to keep the patterns present for now, all watersheds have a catchment zone, conduction areas, storage, and a distribution. And if we want to have the purest water in Denmark, if we want to have the best quality water available to ensure the sustainability of our ecosystems, of our own survival, then we must ensure the quality of these 4 elements. All catchment zones must be pristine ecosystems. All conduction areas must be natural and not straight concrete channels. Storage must be existing. If there is no storage of water in the landscape will dry out. And distributing water in a equitative and just manner for all beings is what we need to look at. So all our designs should replicate this pattern of having a catchment zone that is qualitatively very, very healthy, conduction zones that follow natural patterns, storages that exist, and a distribution area that makes sure that everybody can use the water that they need for their survival, be it a plant, a bee, a sheep, a human person. So this now takes me into a more philosophical way of looking at water, and I just wanted to close today with a reflection. Is water maybe more than life in the ways of food and health? Is it maybe also energy? And I'd like to invite you to dive deeper into the work of Victor Schauberger, who was talking about energy and water in many, many ways. Unfortunately, he got deported to a concentration camp after World War II, during World War II, and he was there forced to work on energy and vortexes, and but his mind was always thinking about how water moves, how water can help things move in a more efficient way. And these flow forms are of his idea. And we like using them in our own water designs as well, in natural pools, etc., because they really revive the water. On the right, we have a message of water in a water crystal. Masaru Emoto was never taken very seriously, but now there is a new person also reinforcing this message of water has memory. Water is speaking to us. Do we need to learn the language of water? Or maybe you already speak it. And just to quickly explain to you what you are seeing here, this is actually a photo of a duck under a Petri dish with water in it. This Petri dish was then put into the freezer. The next day, the Petri dish was taken out of the freezer, and this was the image that was showing in the ice crystals. It looks like a duck, right? There are thousands of photos in Veda Austin's book, and she also invites everyone to try this out for themselves at home. And she receives thousands of pictures as well from people who send them to her, who say, I have spoken the words love, harmony, thank you to my water, and this is what came back to me. The tests are also possible with photos, with hatred and nasty words, where Masaru Emoto was already also showing crystals that are not so beautiful. But there is a lot to be learned still about the element of water. I haven't even talked about the 4th phase of water and the exclusion zone, but I can keep going on. And I think for now, this is enough to get us started from. I hope I have been able to install some passion for the topic of water in you all. And I think for today, I'll just leave it at the famous Bruce Lee saying, be water, my friend. And thank you for hosting me and letting me talk about my favorite topic.